Smooth 98.1. Love music, love life. 17 minutes past 5 p.m. It is a money making Monday evening. You're tuned into the Smooth Drive on your smoothest dial. My name is Ayokunmi and Joy is also with me in the studio. And it's that time to get into the marketplace. And this evening, we're going to be talking about the telcos. I know I mentioned the telcos earlier on, and we're looking at something that is also affecting them as well, the rising cost of doing business for telcos in Nigeria. Of course, the telcos that we have in the country are also dealing with the myriad of issues that are affecting every other Nigerian doing business, and so on and so forth. And joining us this evening is our very, very special guest in the person of Moyosore Taiwo, who is a research analyst at ARM Securities. Very good evening to you, Moyosore. Great to have you on the marketplace.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, spectacular. Now, talking about the rising cost of doing business for telcos in Nigeria, we are going to be looking into something very interesting. Now, the chairman of the Association of Licensed Telecommunication Operators of Nigeria, that's Alton Engineer Bengadi Bayo, he wrote an op-ed titled "Defending the Foundations of Connectivity," and of course, we are hoping that you can break all this down and give us a better understanding of what it all means. But before we jump into that, for all our amazing listeners out there, you can be part of the conversation as always by sharing your thoughts with us on WhatsApp. The number is 0809 440 981. 0809 440 981. And you can also be a part of the live stream. We're streaming live on YouTube at Smooth 981 FM Lagos. So, Moyo, let's begin with this quote from engineer Mengadi Bayo. It says, and I quote, now, while the digital innovation in Nigeria is enabling exciting new possibilities, there's a tendency to focus on these opportunities to the detriment of the core infrastructure on which it actually rides on. Now, what exactly does he mean by that? Hello, are you there? Can you hear me, Moyo? It looks like there's some technical difficulty here. Let's try to establish contact with our guest Moyo Taiwo, and we'll continue the conversation. Stay tuned. This is the marketplace on Smooth 98.1. Don't go anywhere. Moyo, Moyo, can you hear us? Can you hear us, Moyo?
Yes, I can hear you now. I don't know if it was me who logged off.
Okay, so
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay.
all right, we're back in.
But I can't see you.
All right, apologies for that little break in transmission. The gremlins kind of got into the system there. We have our special guest back, Moyosore Taiwo. Moyo, thank you for trying to get the gremlins out of the system so we can have this conversation this evening. So, like I said earlier, I took a quote from that piece by engineer Wenga Adebayo, and it says, while the digital innovation in Nigeria is enabling exciting new possibilities, there's a tendency to focus on those opportunities to the detriment of the core infrastructure on which it actually rides on. What does he mean by that?
Mm.
Hello?
Did you
Yep.
get did you get the quotes, Moya?
Yes, yes. So I think you were talking about while yes, I heard. So can I go? Can I
Yeah, sure.
Please
Go
respond?
go
on.
ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, okay. So unfortunately in Nigeria, many long-term plans are often poorly implemented, and this is most especially from a public sector point of view. And as a result of the high bureaucracy levels and poor corporate governance, the focus tends to be on short-term profitability rather than sustainability, right? And when you want to execute a project sustainably, you have to consider the long-term viability of the project, and then which would then seek to provide continued value to both
Right.
consumers and producers alike. But I believe this code just speaks to how not enough focus is placed on sustainability, and sometimes even over regulation may even limit the growth prospects by preventing cost reflective tariffs, which negatively impacts the future performance of telco companies.
Mm. Okay. Well, apparently there are a lot of things that were actually said, and it seems telco companies are really experiencing a lot. I'm talking about a lot. Well, engineer Adebayo also said that, and I'm taking this quote. He said the continued development of core infrastructure has to be sustainable, and over the last few months, we have begun to see the challenges that the operators that provide it are facing. It says the entire ecosystem is battling with a range of challenges that must be addressed. If we fail to do so, the downstream impact on innovation will be severe. So, we know he spoke about foreign exchange challenges, but can you flesh out those, what all the other challenges are?
Yes, yes, of course. And in terms of the foreign exchange challenges, we know that the impact of foreign exchange challenges cannot be overemphasized. Last year, where we saw the FX liberalization policy, we saw the impact, from the results of the two publicly listed telcos, and we
Mm,
saw huge, FX devaluation losses, which affected their profitability. And this was largely due to the fact that they had liabilities, or they had debt which was in USD, and as a result of a more expensive dollar versus the naira, we saw the higher interest payments translate to higher finance costs. So this was what largely affected their profitability last year
profitability.
and led to those foreign exchange losses. And also, we would also speak to the the tower contracts, where which also have elements of foreign exchange pricing, where their quarterly exchange rates are being used to price their lease contracts in advance. We also see impact of vandalism, impact of insecurity, impact of
Right.
multiple taxation regimes, as significant challenges these telco companies are facing.
Mm, right.
It's very very interesting that we're talking about foreign exchange because it's a bit difficult to talk about foreign exchange issues and not talk about diesel prices, which he also, that's the engineer, but he also spoke about the cost of diesel with respect to the cost of operating cell towers. Can you explain that cost to us? Give us a better understanding of what's going on there.
Oh yes, yes. Thanks for that question. So, many of the towers that telcos operate on, so they usually operate under a build to lease agreement, where
Mm-hmm.
they lease these towers from tower companies, and as a result, these towers must be powered on most times on a 24/7 basis,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And while in recent times we have seen telcos opt for renewable sources of energy in powering their towers, a significant portion of this cost are tied to diesel price increases. So most of their towers are still powered by generators and diesel generators. So when we see diesel prices rise higher, and we know that there have not been any subsidy payments or whatsoever on diesel. So, when we see diesel prices rise higher, it will then translate to higher operating costs, as these telcos, obviously, if you're operating your tower on a 24/7 basis, you have to
Basis.
constantly refuel your
Oh
generator,
yes.
and you have to buy the diesel at the prevailing price, which typically will be at the higher price.
Mm. Well, indeed, it's always going to be higher because we can't vouch for the electricity and how prevalent, how constant it will be actually. But now that we're even talking about running cost and all that, I want to look at this rundown of cost for the telco sector because it also sounds like something that other companies or other businesses are also facing. So, but I want to know, how does the general cost inflation filter through the telco operations?
Okay, I'm thanks for that question. And you know, while we see um so if you think about the how these businesses operate, if you consider their largest cost
Okay.
basis, we would see things like lease expenses and maintenance costs, which
Mm-hmm.
make up a significant portion of their direct network operating costs. But other costs such as rent, utilities, purchase of inventory, and service costs are still being incurred on a day-to-day, on a month-on-month, year-on-year basis, right? And we also see perhaps more significantly the reduced purchasing power of consumers as a result of inflationary pressures. So, we know that telco services are very essential to the daily life of the average man, and
Okay.
as a result, that leads to what we call inelastic demand and higher, cost of living and reduced purchasing power, most times negatively impact, consumer wallet. So that just means that if I normally would use 10 gig data every week and
Mm-hmm.
would watch Netflix, probably, at my spare time, in the advent of
Yeah.
higher prices, I'll probably cut down to about 5 gig, and then I'll still use data, but for more important things and maybe, work calls or, more essential things.
Mm.
Prioritizing, and of course, a scale of preference, economics 101. Taking me back to SS1, economics class, scale of preference, opportunity cost, and the likes. Very, very important in these very interesting times that we are living in right now. Well, we're going to actually continue this conversation on the other side of this quick breather. But before we do that, I also leave you with these thoughts. Now, earlier on, you talked about multiple taxation, which is very interesting because we know that in a lot of other businesses that are out there, and for those who actually deal with moving goods from here to there, we hear about, oh, if moving from Ogun State to Lagos or moving from one state to another, multiple taxation comes in. But for the telcos, it's very interesting to actually know what these sources of multiple taxation are, and hopefully you actually can explain them to us. But on the other side of this quick breather, the marketplace right here on Smooth 98.1. We'll be back in a bit. Don't go anywhere. That's how you drag things out. So far, so good. I was afraid your network was going to do, you know, something funny, but it's behaving.
This is my network.
Yeah, earlier on, when you couldn't hear us, I was really
Yeah,
afraid. Network, we are big.
I'm surprised it's my network because it has been pretty stable. It was pretty stable, all day.
That's what the black ones are. That's what the story is. I'm sure you know. Halfway there. Let the gods of Telco behave. So we talk about Telcos now. Let the gods of Telco behave.
uh,
That's that's fine. That's fine. That's fine.
sorry? Yes.
Yeah, 5:35. Yeah, 5:15 after the last 30 minutes.
What's wrong? You're just curious as to know the span. Oh, that's what you asked.
We're almost there. All right, welcome back to the second half of the marketplace, right here on Smooth 98.1, your love music, love live station. Ayokunmi and Joy are your companions this evening, as well as our very special guest in the person of Moyosore Taiwo. He is a research analyst at ARM Securities, and we've been talking this evening about the rising cost of doing business for telcos in Nigeria. And you can join us in the conversation by sending your messages to us on WhatsApp. The number is 0809 444 981. 0809 444 981. You can also join us on the live stream on YouTube at Smooth 981 FM Lagos. All right, well, welcome back to the show. So earlier on, I was talking about multiple taxations, which you sort of alluded to earlier on. And Engineer Adebayo also mentioned that, as well as costs associated with regulatory compliance. Can you speak to those two, please?
Yeah, that's a very interesting topic as it's something that's been in consideration for a long time, by the telco regulatory bodies and the stakeholders. So, and we see that multiple taxation is an issue that's faced, by many businesses across the country. However, for telcos, it may be more glaring because of the presence of its large fiscal infrastructure and which exposes it to taxes across federal, state, and local levels, right? And multiple taxation typically is a chokehold on the growth of the sector as it
Oh,
limits the ease
yes.
of doing business the ease of doing business, which is a major metric used considered by foreign investors. So when you
Mhm.
have lower ease of doing business, foreign investors are less confident in the economy or in the sector, and this discourages them from putting in their capital. So basically, if to improve the level of capital that's been attracted into the economy, and we know that telcos represent about 14% of the GDP. The multiple taxation problem has to be effectively taken out.
Mm.
Can that ever actually be taken off? Because I mean, if you think about all the negatives that the multiple taxation is actually causing and all the headaches it's causing, I mean, common sense would dictate that, okay, we can see what effect this is having. Let's make life a little bit easier. Shouldn't that be the way things go?
Yeah, I mean, it should, but it would be imperative to note that these are different, state bodies, and when they are typically some many of these taxes do not really have, legal backings, right? So, when
Ah,
these
okay.
states, when these, taxes are being, enacted, they don't really consider the economy as an overall, right? So it's just like when, you want to pay for when you park and then someone comes and charges you for wrong parking. There's not really, there's no real legal backing there, but it's still a form of tax, by the government, I would say, right? So that's why it's been really hard to take it out. But if there is a clear and transparent means of taxing, which was proposed by the Presidential and Fiscal Committee, which proposed, making it online, right, where it's very transparent, the taxes you're going to pay, that would effectively, address those multiple taxation concerns.
Mm. All right. Great to know that at least those things are actually being, tackled head on. But now let's even talk about the issue of vandalization because I know that Engineer Debray also brought that up, uh, talking about the vandalization of infrastructure. But really, is that still a thing that telcos are still experiencing?
Oh yes, definitely. So, the impact of incessant vandalization on telecom equipment is evidence across many assets, such efforts such as fiber cuts,
Okay.
theft of telecom facilities like generators, destruction of base station, among others. These have been the major burden on service providers, and we saw in 2020 significant steps were taken to address this, which
Mm-hmm.
kind of recognized it as a significant impact or significant negative impact on telecoms, and where we saw the previous administration declaring telecom infrastructure as critical national infrastructure, which just means that these assets are basically essential for the effective functioning of the economy or society as a whole. And this was done in order to discourage vandalism and just to tell people that okay that this is basically a national asset, and if you basically vandalize, then you're liable to prosecution. So it was so yeah. So I'll say yes.
So in that vein, does that mean that there are people that have been actually persecuted, seeing that this is a national issue, so to speak?
I mean, I don't have, detailed a detailed view, but I would say that so when you have the policy, enforcement is also very, key, right?
Mm,
When we see that, the stakeholders as well as the government work hand in hand to, so the stakeholders provide, the government with information on location and, possibly uh, when they feel there are dangers, to their assets, right? And the government works speedily. So in that vein, we would then see, improved efforts towards securing this, infrastructure, right? But in
Mhm.
terms of you know, detailed evidence of prosecution,
mhm.
I can't really say.
All right.
As far as I'm concerned, that is something that needs to be more, should I say, more apparent and clearer to everyone. Because talking about vandalization, it goes beyond even the telcos. I mean, look at bridges and all that. You see
Mm,
people, taking off the railings on the bridges, stealing manholes, which lead to accidents,
Yeah,
and even people losing their lives as well.
indeed.
And of course, we know
exactly.
the telcos are going through a lot in terms of their infrastructure being vandalized, and it really, it really stronger arm needs to, be put out there in terms of dealing
Yeah,
with these issues. But moving
absolutely.
on, I mean, we can't talk about the telcos right now and not talk about power, because Engineer Adebayo in that piece talked about the power sector, and he said, and I quote, cost reflective tariffs, like it or not, are simply non-negotiable. We have seen the impact of price controls in other segments of the economy, like power. If providers cannot operate sustainable business models, then they stop investing. When that happens, the
Mm.
existing infrastructure starts to crumble. Unquote. What do you make of that point?
Oh, I mean, so I think here he's just saying that that telcos should be allowed to price in a way that appropriately reflects their cost basis, and this means that, when, telcos feel, you know a price increment is necessary to operate in a way that, their profit margins will be protected, right? They
Mhm.
should be allowed to, you know
Go
enact
with
price.
it. Okay.
Yes, increase prices. So, this just means that, telcos would then be allowed to operate sustainably and also provide optimal service value nationwide. So, if, they're able to effectively price as is and vis-a-vis their cost, right, it means that, they can operate in a way that, continue to make profits because investors are putting their money into, this business. It's foreign investors, right? So, and they
Right.
expect a certain level of return when they're putting their money. And if the expected return on that investment is not attractive enough, they will not want to commit more, capital into that business. And as a result, we'll see, depreciation of the current assets. If the maintenance, is not up to date, we see depreciation, we see the infrastructure start to crumble. So I think this is what he just meant by that quote.
Mm. So, but does that, seeing that indeed they have to quote what it is there, however it is, pass it down to the consumer. But at the same time, is it something that they should actually be passing the full bulk to the consumer, seeing that the economy isn't economizing as so to speak. So how then do they also create a balance so that the customer is also not looking like, oh, okay, I don't necessarily need this facility, or I don't necessarily need this service, so I could just excuse myself for it, and then at the end of the day the telco is also going to suffer for it.
I mean, like I earlier, stated, so telco services are inelastic. So in economics, that means that people don't react as harshly when prices are increased because it's an essential part of everyday life. So I mean, if you recall the price cuts that happened, earlier this and the fiber cuts that happened earlier this year, where we couldn't really access. We know the impact on our everyday lives and when we couldn't access
Yes.
the internet. So things like that really mean that when prices are increased, people don't react as harshly. But also the government has to take into consideration the welfare of the citizens. So when they increase prices, we all know where inflation is at today. So when prices are increased, that will also translates also into higher inflation numbers. And they have to take all these things into consideration. So
Mm-hmm.
um, a, a- an effective dialogue between telecom stakeholders and the government has to be undertaken, to arrive at a delicate balance. So continuous dialogue is necessary.
All right. Great stuff there. And apparently, there's so many quotes that Engineer Debo actually shared. And one of them has to do with, and I quote, he said, "We fully understand and appreciate the financial stress that Nigerians are experiencing today," which is one of the things that I actually alluded to earlier on, right? And he says the cost of living is the single most significant factor in most people's daily lives. But those people are still able to enjoy the benefits that connectivity brings at the price they paid before these challenges became so acute. So, what do you make of this, or of what he's actually trying to say here?
Yeah, I think this alludes to what we were speaking to earlier. So a delicate balance has to be struck between the long-term viability of these telco companies and the higher cost of living faced by consumers. So if we place excess emphasis on one over the other, it
Mm,
could definitely spell negative consequences for the economy as a whole, right? So if you place more emphasis on consumers rather than telcos, it will mean that, and taking into consideration that telecommunication contributes to about 14% of GDP, it will mean that you know a lot of stress will be placed on that sector, which
mm,
could also affect unemployment, raise unemployment, and as a result, even further worsen the standard of living. And if excess emphasis is also placed on telcos, it could spell higher cost of living. It could also spell higher inflation numbers, reduced purchasing power. So, delicate balance needs to be struck, and that can only be achieved by continuous engagements between stakeholders involved.
great stuff.
Okay, Moya, it's a very interesting interesting conversation that we've been having so far on the issues that are bedeviling the telecom sector. Now, as we run the conversation, this is two pronged. First of all, what would be the effect of the telcos not being able to find this delicate balance in terms of okay their sustainability and of course delivering good service? What would be the effect if these telcos at the end of the day? This is maybe hypothetical. I hope that doesn't happen.
Mhm.
But what would the long term effect? I mean, economy aside, I mean, looking at the consumers to start with, what would be the long term effect on Nigeria and Nigerians, businesses, and so on and so forth?
If they are unable to find a delicate balance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, that would be, you know, so first of all, I mean, it's very important to talk about the economy as a whole because it relates to unemployment, which is a very significant factor at play here. Like I mentioned, telecoms contributes about 14% to GDP. So if that and we've seen the telecoms continually support our GDP over the years. So if stress is placed on that sector, it would then spell um, so if we take into consideration maybe 2020 what we saw in the telecoms literally showed that the performance of the economy right during the coronavirus era. So if
Right.
that sector you know plunges into a period of declining productivity, we would see increased unemployment, we would see um, higher cost of living, we would see people being unable to afford the basic necessities of life. And we know what that spells. It spells into higher poverty, it spells into increased insecurity, right? So, it's a sector that, the government is well aware that needs to be, uh, in a sense, protected while also carefully taking into consideration the impact of the welfare of consumers.
Hmm.
Right. Hopefully that very delicate balance can actually be found because I mean, uh, we need each other. I mean, we need the telcos need us as well. The economy needs the telcos, and it just goes on and on and on from there. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We've been talking to Moyosore Taiwo. He's a research analyst at ARM Securities, and we've been talking about the rising cost of doing business for telcos in Nigeria. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Alrighty. And to all our amazing listeners out there, thank you for being a part of the marketplace. We do this every Monday at 5:15 p.m. right here on Smooth 98.1. Meanwhile, the Smooth Drive with Joy and Ayokunmi will continue more great music to look forward to as we journey along to the 6 o'clock hour.